Hi, everyone. Welcome to our breakout session. So we are breakout session on topic 3, sharing experiences on policy frameworks for just energy transition pathways and holistic approaches to just transitions that leave no one behind. So just to get everyone a little more animated. So we don't have too many of us in this room, so I'm just going to ask for like a really quick introduction around the room because there's enough of us that we can do that. So if you don't mind just saying your name and who you are, I think that'll help us get the right kind of vibe that we want for this discussion. So let's begin over here with Saudi Arabia.
Oh, oh, I think I'm done. Okay, good.
Did everyone get that? I think so. All right.
Thank you, Jane. My name is Bruno. I work within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil at the Renewable Energy Division within the Energy Department. So I'm willing to hear from everyone on this debate. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Janet Milongo from Climate Action Network International with the Environment NGO's constituency. And I work at CAN International on energy transition, and I'm from Kenya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stella Hashman. I'm from Observatório do Clima, a network of civil society organizations in Brazil, but I'm also part of CAN International, and I'm here representing them as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Samuel Chimoa from Malawi. I work in the Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change, working around several issues, mitigation, Article 6 and just transition. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Zunera. I'm part of the LDC Just Transition team and also support the LDC Chair's office.
Hi everyone, Colin from Trinidad and Tobago, but I support the AOSIS chair, which is currently Palau, on just transition negotiations, and have been in this process for quite some time.
Thanks, and hi everyone. I'm Jonathan from Germany, so also part of the EU and in the UNFCCC process, mainly covering just transition and outside of that, the G20 related negotiations on climate. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Tyler. I'm from the Environment and Climate Change Department in Canada. I follow the Just Transition and Response Measures negotiations.
Hi everyone, I am Chris from Grenada. There I represent the Ministry of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy, and many things pertaining to climate change come past my desk. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Khaled Hashim. I'm Director of Climate Affairs at the Sustainable Development and Environment Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, and I'm also the G77 coordinator for the Just Transition Work Program.
Hello everyone, my name is Fred Manyika from the United Republic of Tanzania. I'm Assistant Director responsible for climate change in the Vice President's office. But here I'm covering the just transition on behalf of the African group of negotiators. Thank you.
All right, I think that's everyone in the room. Did I miss anyone in the room? And I know we have a number of people online, so I'm going to ask if you're going to make an intervention from online, please do introduce yourself when you do that. But otherwise, let's get going. And if you're making an intervention from the room and you've just newly entered and you haven't introduced yourself, please do that before you speak. So I'm looking for who's going to kick us off. Do I see any flags up? So just to remind everyone, we have two questions, which are here on the screen. How can enabling environments for just energy transition pathways, holistic approaches to just transitions, and economic diversification be designed to reflect national defined development priorities? And what are some examples of bottom-up, community-led, and participatory governance frameworks and approaches for just energy transition pathways in this context, including through its dialogues? So, do I have any takers for sharing some experiences, or anyone online? Otherwise, I'm going to call on someone. So. Canada, I see you going for it. Can we have the microphone over to Canada, please? Do you? Oh, okay. Yep, so you'll have to come up to the standing mic. Thank you. I think. I'm not sure. Okay.
I think it works. Does that work?
I think so.
Great. Yeah, I guess I can kick us off and break the ice a little bit. Speaking about enabling environments, which often include legislation. So in the Canadian context, we recently adopted the Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act, which creates enabling environment or mechanisms necessary for the government of Canada to foster the creation of sustainable jobs, which supports workers, industries, and communities in every region across Canada. And it helps the workforce gain the necessary skills, training, and tools to fill these job opportunities that are arising in the clean energy transition. This legislation was a historic step in placing Canadian workers at the center of Canada's approach to the transition and establishing a process of accountability on sustainable jobs. So as we see global investment flows moving towards low carbon economic opportunities, the government seized upon that and have appropriately scaled and well-equipped workforce. They recognize that this was necessary for that transition. So this legislation is based on guiding principles which build upon the International Labor Organization's guidelines for just transition, such as the need for adequate, informed, and ongoing social dialogue, the need to support the creation of decent work, and recognizing local and regional values, and inclusivity and addressing barriers to employment, particularly for those that are underrepresented in the labor market. One of the key aspects of this legislation is the establishment of a tripartite advice-giving body, which is called the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council, and this is tasked with engaging Canadians and providing advice to the minister responsible for the legislation. That Partnership Council is made up of a balance of representatives from industry, labor, and Indigenous peoples, as well as civil society. And it's helping to ensure that Canada's sustainable jobs measures are communicated through action plans every 5 years, and they're aligned with the local realities that reflect the needs and experiences of partners and stakeholders from other levels of government, labor unions, workers, industry, civil society, and Indigenous organizations in a meaningful way. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I'm going to move online for a minute just to give us a nice balance. I think we have C40 online.
Yes, hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, hi everyone. Yeah, Jasmine Burgess, I'm the Director of Inclusive Climate Action at C40 Cities, but I'm intervening on behalf of the local government and municipalities constituency. And nice to see some familiar faces both in the room and online. Yeah, just to come onto the two guiding questions, I think it will probably come as no surprise that our main point that we'd like to raise, of course, is that when you're thinking of both an enabling environment and local engagement and community engagement on the energy transition, the involvement of local and subnational government is absolutely key. And I have to say that we were a bit disappointed to see, particularly in the framing presentations that were just provided in the one from the summary from the Secretariat, that there was actually no mention of the local initiatives, that many of which were included in submissions, not just from ourselves, but also from across the different parties and others, because the ability to mobilize municipal and subnational governments is actually a key enabling factor to actually be able to deliver a local energy transition that both includes communities but ensures that this is done in a fair way. Local governments, as my colleagues have mentioned in other interventions, play a key role in expanding clean energy access, also ensuring that the transition is fair and considers some of the social equity elements. You know, we have plenty of examples of local governments running social dialogues and engaging on consultations on the different levels of needed. Also, numerous local governments running community energy projects. We have some fantastic examples from Africa, where everyone is, and I am virtual, where there has been great work by city governments to expand renewable energy access in informal settlements, and that is also key in terms of the community involvement. We have one example outside of Africa, for example, in Rio, where the city partnered in favela areas to roll out solar panels in informal settlements, while also being able to ensure that those solar panels are part of the grid, and then being able to generate income for the community, as well as train people to be able to become solar energies. And that kind of initiative is involving the local government, and the governance and infrastructure of local government is the key enabling factor. And then just secondly, a bit more about on the second question, we can provide plenty of actual examples of bottom-up community-led frameworks, and particularly the way that subnational government has played a key role. But I think the key point that I just want to make in my intervention is that there are examples of local just transition commissions happening at both regional and I mean like state, federal level, but also at city and also at rural level through municipalities, and those provide a model for how you can actually engage different levels of communities, but also a way for national government to partner with municipalities to be able to unleash a number of different community and participatory governance frameworks. We are going to share a more comprehensive written submission, though somewhere in our previous submission that gives a number of city examples, but just highlighting the key role that we can play in partnership with national governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, C40. And, you know, earlier someone said to me how hard it is to see action on the ground from any of this. And I do think that that local engagement, the local engagement of communities, governments, is so key to seeing all of this kind of translate into on-the-ground action. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to move back to the room, and actually please do go to the standing mic. We need you to be at the standing mic for the camera. Who do I have in the room? Everyone's looking down and avoiding eye contact with me. Okay, thank you. Egypt and then Saudi Arabia, and then I'm going to go to Chile online.
Oh, thank you very much. Am I audible? Yes, okay. So actually I wanted to add to the important points that was brought up by our colleague from Canada here with regard to the, yes, I can hear myself better now. Okay, so with regard to the national enabling environments through policy, cohesion, and integration, and to bring into perspective also the international enabling environment for the just transitions. And we have, as we have seen today in our presentation in the morning, there are plenty of enabling international environment that should be brought into perspective so that countries would be able to pursue their just energy transition pathways also on a national level. And basically it starts with the scaling of the predictable and affordable financing, bringing the CBDRC principles within perspective, and also the technology sharing, expanding financial space, and also the new cooperation mechanism that could be brought into the question as well. As G77 and China and many of the developing countries, we had worked on this kind of institutional arrangement under the Just Transition Work Program, trying to propose some ideas of having this a platform or a framework for enabling this cooperative approaches through enabling the international environment for the just transition. One also very important perspective when it comes to the enabling environment, we should also address the disenablers for the international cooperation with regard to the just transition. And one of these would be related to the trade and the unilateral measures and policies such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism under the CBAM applied by some countries pose significant risk to the exports industries, competitiveness, and economic sovereignty of developing countries, and it does definitely has its negative impact on their just transition pathways on a national level. Addressing these threats is imperative. Multilateral cooperation must be at the heart of creating an enabling global environment for just transition, preventing unilateral actions from undermining shared progress. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Egypt. Now I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia. You got to go up to the mic. Okay. Is it possible to bring the mic?
Thank you. Thank you, facilitator. So Saudi Arabia aligned ourselves with the Egypt, and we underline the equity of CBDRC and must incur any discussions of just transition pathways. Pathways must remain nationally determined and whole of economy focused instead of sectoral, and not imposed through prescriptive models or external conditionalities. For our region, just transition cannot be discussed without energy security at the center. Hospitals, schools, and basic services in our countries rely on reliable and affordable power. Developed countries are ignoring the calls for them to lead mitigation action, failing in honoring their responsibilities, all while calling on developing countries to accelerate transition under debt-heavy finance. This double standard undermines trust and shift burden into those least responsible for climate change. Saudi Arabia stressed that enabling environment cannot be created without removing the obstacles, high cost of capital, unilateral measures, and resistance barriers to finance and technologies. These are real constraints facing developing countries and are constantly ignored and undermined by the developed countries. For us, just transition first means lifting our people out of energy poverty, not targeting our development needs without constitutional public finance, fair technology transfer, and policy space. Talk of just transitions risk becoming another tool to restrict developing countries instead of empowering them. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Now I'm going to go to two online. First Chile and then GIZ.
Hello, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. I will share some experiences on policy frameworks in our national level. In regard of the first question, we considered transition as a cross-sector policy framework that requires the coordination and implementation of a set of public instruments to generate the necessary synergies between international climate commitments, national sectoral agendas, and the challenges posed by territories undergoing transition, where the close link between climate and socio-environmental dimensions is evident. In the Chilean case, our national strategy on socio-ecological just transition, which includes many goals related to the energy dimension, was constructed in alignment with the NDC update process and the climate change framework law. Moreover, the specific targets of the strategy were constructed with near 16 ministries and public services with competence in transition processes, including local governments, which aligned their own agendas and included specific contributions into the national strategy and its actions plans, which will be implemented until 2030 and 2035. This approach fostered the interinstitutional collaboration and distribution of responsibilities and budgets for just transition processes across the country. In regard of the second question, in the Chilean case, during the elaboration of the national strategy, we applied three main participatory approaches. First, an expert panel was established, which includes 30 civil society, trade unions, companies, and academic organizations. This panel met 6 times to evaluate the progress of the national strategy elaboration and make recommendations which were directly taken by the technical team in charge of this policy. Second, according to our environmental law, open public activities were realized in the 16 regions of the country, and more than 400 observations for the preliminary draft were received and integrated in the final document. And third, a process of environmental assessment was applied, which involved 18 state administration organisms, including technical teams and specialized agencies. All of these three approaches were overarched by the Interministerial Committee of Socio-Ecological Just Transition, a political coordination space established in 2022. Finally, in terms of governance frameworks, the recently approved national strategy recognized that just transition processes require a flexible and representative space in order to guarantee legitimacy and coherence throughout all decision-making and implementation stages. Due to this, the governance is structured in local, regional, and national levels with interactions among all three. I can share with you the whole governance scheme, but for now it's important to mention that bottom-up and community-led approaches are applied at the local level, which includes trade unions, medium and small enterprises, academia, and 3 types of community organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to go to GIZ online and then LDC in the room. So GIZ, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. This is Nicholas Bessel speaking on behalf of GIZ, Germany's Agency for International Cooperation. And on the second question, I would like to highlight one example from cooperation with our South African partners, namely the Komati Just Energy Transition Community Engagement and Interventions Co-Creation Project. So launched in December last year and led by Indalo Inclusive South Africa with support from the GIZ project Just SA, funded through the International Climate Initiative, it demonstrates what community-led participatory governance can look like in practice. At Komati, located in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, the closure and repurposing of a coal power station is being guided by principles of fairness and inclusivity. Nothing about us without us. This is achieved through 1. Participatory co-creation workshops that bring women, men, youth and older adults into problem analysis and solution design. 2nd, innovation boot camps and business incubation to turn community ideas into viable enterprises, from sustainable farming to eco-bricks and water solutions. Third, community leadership structures, such as youth committees and steering groups that guarantee meaningful representation and transparent budgeting. Fourth, inclusive communication platforms, from WhatsApp to community radio, ensuring access to information in local languages. And fifth, skills and livelihood transition frameworks that link vocational training and entrepreneurial support to emerging green jobs with gender-responsive measures to support women and vulnerable groups. So from Komati, several lessons emerged that can be replicated and adapted in different contexts. The co-creation cycle, from awareness to innovation to ownership to sustainability, community innovation incubators that generate locally relevant solutions, institutionalizing youth and women's leadership, transparent, multilingual communication to build trust and prevent exclusion, and finally, integrating socioeconomic priorities, jobs, health, dignity, safety, so that energy transition is not only technical but also developmental. Of course, replication requires sufficient capacities and resources, skilled facilitation, time for multi-stage engagement, inclusive outreach logistics, and seed funding for pilot implementation. But I consider this as a good example for showing that bottom-up governance is not only possible, but also essential for a just transition to ensure that communities are not passive recipients, but active shapers of their future. Thank you very much, and back to you, facilitator.
Thank you, GIZ. We don't have that much time. It's the theme of the day, so I'm going to ask everyone to keep their interventions relatively short. LDC, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of quick points on the first question. A key thing for the LDC group and something that we have been bringing up in all the dialogues is how the conversation around the enabling environments on a global level needs to be tailored to the needs of LDCs. For example, energy access, access expansion, not just being the source, is really important and often gets left out in conversations around transitioning. Another key aspect is that LDC energy landscapes are quite different from more advanced economies. For example, sources like biomass, hydropower are not often discussed in these contexts, and that's something that's very important. Even when it comes to fossil fuels, the LDC angle is slightly different. A lot of the countries don't have very developed fossil fuel infrastructure, and as we heard from the scene setting presentation as well, there's also these mixed messages on the international level with the Chad example where countries may be incentivized or be directed into fossil fuel exploration instead of understanding the risks of stranded assets. In terms of examples, I'll just quickly mention two things. So on the more local level, rural electrification programs across many countries, for example, Nepal, Mali, Senegal, many others as well, work really well. Of course, these are on quite a small scale and a lot needs to be done to expand this, but these often feature hybrid governance models with state and local ownership, which promotes accountability and ownership. They have often participatory councils and cooperatives that can help maintain and expand mini-grids. These are often enabled with government subsidies and also through international partnerships, so that's really important. Zooming out, the LDC group has a particular initiative called LDC RE, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Initiative. I urge everyone to look it up. This is an LDC-owned and LDC-driven initiative which has 3 core targets: 100% access to energy by 2030, 100% access to renewable energy by 2050, and this sort of initiative works closely with the LDC countries and helps them in understanding their technical needs and also helps them develop partnerships and proposals. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to African group and Germany in the room, and then WGC online, and then it's time for us to move on. So, African group, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll limit my response to the first question, which is on the enabling environment, like the G7 in China and LDC. We see these have two levels. One is at the national level, which we need to design and enable environment that are aligned with the just transition with national development priorities, which we can integrate, for instance, LDC, NDCs, the low emission development and plans and the other strategies. We also need to, at a national level, to ensure inclusive participatory governance by engaging communities, local peoples, and as well as other partners that in designing and implementing the project. We need to also to establish a supportive policy and incentive for renewable energy, and particularly the clean energy and clean cooking, which are key for most of the developing countries, but particularly in Africa. And another important is to have a predictable financing, which is free of debt, because debt keeps African countries indebted and also controlling development, just transition. Now, at the international level, the enabling environment, like the two colleagues have pointed out, the effect of unilateral measures that are being imposed by our partners, I think they are constraining and creating barriers for exports and undermining competitiveness for our industries in Africa and the other developing countries. Such measures very often ignore the structural realities of African economies and constrain the physical and the policy space needed for nationally determined just transition. Thank you, Madam Facilitator.
Thank you very much. Germany, the floor is yours.
Yes, now. All right, for the sake of time, I'll try to go through in a staccato modus. So, yeah, on the one hand, creating enabling environments begins for us with coherent and cross-sectoral policies that link climate action and energy security, but also economic development and social protection. And that's why we have, in the EU level, the national energy and climate plans, but also the Green Deal and the Just Transition mechanism, which exemplify holistic planning and also integrating energy, labor, and regional development priorities. And we think that such frameworks also guide investments towards low carbon solutions while also safeguarding workers and communities in fossil fuel dependent sectors. We also support investments in renewable energy clusters, green manufacturing, circular economy initiatives, and sustainable tourism as alternative economic drivers, and the EU structural funds and also the Just Transition Fund provide grants and loans to support regional economic diversification, aligning also with national development priorities. With regard to inclusive governance, this is of course also central to enabling environments. So we promote tripartite social dialogue, multi-stakeholder platforms, and participatory decision-making mechanisms. I'll refrain from naming them specifically. And an effective enabling environment also requires continuous monitoring, of course, evaluation and adaptive policy making, which was also something that was mentioned in the icebreaker, I think. With regard to the second question, we also have made the experience that community energy cooperatives exemplify participatory approaches. In several of our member countries, these cooperatives allow also citizens to own, develop, and operate renewable energy projects. Yeah, and this really enhances local buy-in, but also strengthens social acceptance and ensures economic benefits to also stay within the communities. We also have territorial transition plans. We map local needs, identify transition opportunities, and also co-create strategies. Community energy hubs and microgrids, also partly mentioned already, where communities co-invest in distributed renewable systems, often also integrated with local heating, mobility, and storage solutions. And lastly, we have the EU's supported networks like ResCoop.eu and the European Local Energy Assistance, so ELENA facility, which provide platforms for peer-to-peer learning and best practice exchange. Yeah, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Germany. All right, we're going to go to WGC online, and then Grenada. It's WGC, over to you.
Thank you so much, Madam Facilitator. We just wanted to bring up 2 points specifically. The first one, in indication to the fact that only 9% of all energy sector development finance had a specific gender equality objective. And therefore, we have been trying to demonstrate the power that truly comes from community control, women-led renewable energy solutions as an enabler of climate, economic, and gender justice, and also needing to understand that women and gender diverse people are not just beneficiaries, but have to be part of the action and have to be part of the leading of these processes, especially combining their knowledge, networks, and financing in support of frontline gender just energy solutions and leadership, forging cross-sectoral partnership across the gender justice, feminist, climate, and energy sectors. And the second thing that we wanted to bring up specifically was the call for an institutional arrangement under the Just Transition Work Program with the Global Just Transition Mechanism as an opportunity to ensure that observer constituencies and other stakeholders have an institutional support system to participate in the advancement of the Just Transition Work Program, especially through setting up a steering committee that involves the observer constituencies, but also other critical stakeholders outside of the UNFCCC. And the last thing that we also wanted to bring up is to promote gender just power building approaches to the just energy transition, especially in policy and practice that challenges the ongoing impact of extractives and fossil fuels, which we know is also the same form of violence that women, especially in the front lines, and women defenders have to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to go to Grenada, and then we'll have to close out this session. So Grenada, over to you.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. So in the context of community participation in just transition in small island developing states, I think that access to, or equitable access to financing and technology capacity development for local stakeholders are quite key. Strengthened legal and policy frameworks and support for ecosystem-based approaches that link economies to renewable energy and sustainable industries. I think these are quite key. These measures are essential as we transition away from fossil fuels and address the disproportionate impacts of climate change. We also require strong partnerships with international bodies and tailored strategies, if you will, which are all in a national context. So I think that key enabling factors for community participation would be capacity development, so investment in local expertise through training. I think these are key and crucial to building the capacity within particularly national delegations and people, individuals who can become future leaders to engage effectively on climate change. And as it relates to ecosystem-based approaches, integrate blue and green economies so that small island developing states can reduce fossil fuel dependence by linking renewable energy with ocean-based economies, fostering sustainable fisheries and tourism to create an inclusive type of employment. One of the things also in terms of a structure which Grenada has implemented is a community structure that is referred to as a partnership of social partners. So the Prime Minister essentially chairs that grouping, and it is inclusive of the private sector, youth, non-state actors, and they would meet on a monthly basis and essentially, have discussions on issues of national perspective. And I think this is one structure that really held the people's feet to the fire and facilitated, the sharing of information and knowledge, and really helped to move things at the highest level locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Granada, and thank you to everyone. I know there's still a few folks who want to weigh in. Unfortunately, we have to stop this session here, but there will be a chance to intervene again when we do the report back. So everyone is going to stay in this room, except for us. We're gonna move, and you will have your facilitator for the next question. So thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward to talking with you all later.
Topic 1, which is identifying concrete and actionable outcomes for the JTWP in the context of just energy transition pathways and holistic approaches to just transitions, including through synergies within and outside the UNFCCC. Given the limited time that we have to answer the questions that have been included in the concept note today, I'm asking you to engage with both of the questions as you answer at one time. And just to remind you of the two questions, they are: what could be some concrete and actionable outcomes for the JTWP in the context of just energy transition pathways and holistic approaches to just transition? And how can the JTWP best capitalize on synergies within and outside the UNFCCC in this context, including through its dialogues? So I already see that some of you have their flags up, so thank you for that, and I will ask IPO to take the floor. IPO, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the Secretariat. I speak on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples constituency. I speak on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples constituency. The Just Transition Work Program must deliver concrete, resourced, and rights-based outcomes, especially for Indigenous peoples. We are not stakeholders, we are rights holders, and our participation must be full and effective, not symbolic. First, related to resulting informal note from SB 62, we completely support paragraph 11 as the guiding principles of the Just Transition Work Program, and call for the insertion of a new paragraph, subparagraph 11L, and the strengthening of paragraphs 11C, G, H, and K to operationalize the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, particularly free, prior, and informed consent, self-determination, and the collective rights of our peoples. This must include explicit protections for Indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation and initial contact through a precautionary approach and no-contact principles. Second, we support option 2 of the resulting informal note from SB 62 to establish a global platform or technical hub under the JTWP with direct, well-resourced participation of Indigenous peoples. This would not only build capacity, but ensure we are shaping the energy transition, not just absorbing its impacts. Third, we urge the creation of a dedicated financial mechanism to support Indigenous peoples' vital contributions to just transitions. This would fund Indigenous-led energy projects, support mapping and land titling for the protection of land security of our territories, and scale up ecosystems-based solutions grounded in traditional knowledge. Access must be simplified and accompanied by readiness support. Fourth, as previously mentioned by different parties, the JTWP must include the reference to transitioning away from fossil fuel and eliminate subsidies, and these public funds must be redirected towards decentralized, Indigenous-owned energy systems and clean cooking solutions that benefit those most impacted. Fifth, the Just Transition Work Program must guide parties on reducing dependence on transition minerals by promoting circularity, recycling, and substitution, and most importantly, ensuring that human rights and environmental protections are in place across supply chains. Six, we need disaggregated indicators that reflect Indigenous realities alongside a participatory monitoring system and grievance mechanisms accessible to Indigenous peoples, including for environmental defenders whose lives are under threat for protecting what remains of our natural world. Within the UNFCCC, we recommend to tie the JTWP deliverables to NDCs, SNAPs, LT-LEDs, Global Stocktake Follow-up, LSIP, Article 6 safeguards, loss and damage through early warning systems and social protection, the GCF, the GEF, direct access to funds. Beyond the UNFCCC, the JTWP should align the concept to the Convention on Biological Diversity, ILO 169, UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, MRIP, and Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and OECD Standards on Responsible Business Conduct are essential. The ICJ and Inter-American Court of Human Rights advisory opinion on the precautionary principle and the right to a healthy climate must also guide us, particularly for the protection of indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation, and should reflect the recommendations from the UN Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list, I have Eosis. Eosis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So as to the first question, concrete and actionable outcomes for the Just Transition Work Program, we see this as helping SIDS advance energy transition pathways that are holistic, addressing both mitigation and resilience. For SIDS, this means integrating just transition principles into NDCs and national adaptation strategies so that energy shifts are linked to food security, fisheries, tourism, just examples of sectors that are central to our survival. So the outcomes could include support for national coordination bodies or regional hubs that align energy transition planning with broader resilience measures. We also need programs that diversify livelihoods. So we heard examples that the energy transition is also about diversification. And we need to see some programs that diversify livelihoods through climate resilient agriculture, small-scale fisheries, and sustainable tourism, while expanding access to affordable renewable energy, clean water, and health services. As to the second question, the JTWP should capitalize on synergies by making the dialogues a bridge between energy transition planning and broader developmental agendas. Inside the UNFCCC process, this means linking the JTWP with the work of the technology mechanism, the KCI, the Santiago Network, and as we saw this morning with the scene-setting presentation, as was displayed in terms of what was made through the submissions. Outside the process, synergies can be built with regional development banks, international finance institutions, and especially some South-to-South cooperation among SIDS to mobilize concessional finance and share practical lessons on renewable deployment and resilient infrastructure. So priority must be placed on capacity support for national planning and project preparation so that SIDS can translate just transition principles into bankable projects. We also heard an intervention this morning by UNCTAD that spoke to the profitability of the diversification and the profitability, of what we need to attract the investments. So with that, the Just Transition Work Program can demonstrate that energy transition pathways are not only about decarbonization, but about holistic, equitable development in vulnerable contexts. Thanks.
Thank you, Eosis. Next on my list, I have Engo. Engo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Secretariat. I'm speaking on behalf of Climate Action Network as part of INGO. And let me start by saying that civil society groups give a lot of importance to the Just Transition Work Program, delivering concrete outcomes as soon as possible, starting in Belém. And we are glad to have these conversations in Panama and Bonn and here today. We, together with other right-based constituencies, have been reflecting a lot since Baku on what actions taken in the Just Transition Work Program can make the lives and livelihoods of workers and communities better. Firstly, echoing some of the interventions we already heard about creating new institutional arrangements, we believe that if we want all efforts on just transition to be directed towards achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement in a way that secures justice for workers, communities, and countries, it belongs to the UNFCCC to facilitate, accelerate, and contribute to the coordination of efforts through our institutional arrangements. And in particular, we are proposing the launch of a global mechanism, the Belém Action Mechanism, BAM, for a global just transition to accelerate and support country efforts to transition. And responding to some of the questions, we believe that the mechanism will not duplicate existing work, but rather strengthen coordination across existing initiatives and bodies. The mechanism would focus on coordination ensuring coherence and complementary of just transition efforts within and outside UNFCCC. Implementing support, ensuring access to technical, financial, and knowledge-based support, including identification of non-debting, inducing finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to countries in the Global South, and pathways to address trade and investment-related barriers to the just transition. And knowledge generation, facilitating the sharing of knowledge, experience, and best practice on key elements concerning just transition. Secondly, in recent years, we have seen multiple developments of just transition initiatives in energy and other sectors, and this is watering down fundamental elements, leaving a scattered landscape for policymakers and civil society, and often contributing to social washing. This is why CAN sees an opportunity for the UNFCCC to agree on guiding principles, as it would foster policy coherence nationally and internationally, support implementation, and serve as a reference point for other constituent bodies within and outside UNFCCC, national climate plans, such as NDCs, NEPs, and long-term LEDs, and the Global Just Transition Mechanism. These principles would ensure just transition's actions are equitable, inclusive, right-based, and aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. Third, to make just transition financeable, it's key by recognizing the design and implementation of just transition policies, plans, programs, and practice as supportive of climate ambition and therefore eligible to receive climate finance. Examples of such policies, plans, programs, and practice include provision of social dialogues, consultation mechanisms, social protection policies, including policies related to care, ecosystem restoration, skills and reskilling policies, economic diversification, among others. Finally, given the importance of bottom-up, community-led and participatory governance, we think we should agree to institutionalize participation and co-creation at national level. And to conclude, we see these demands as a package. As taken together at COP30, they can positively affect the lives and livelihoods of millions of people, and charting a new journey for climate action, one that puts people and their rights at the heart.
Thank you, Engo. Next on my list, I have Germany. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you. So on the first question, the EU very much wants and hopes to reach also a substantial agreement on the J2WP this year, and we also believe that it can play a key role in increasing the ambition and fostering just energy transition pathways that contribute also to creating quality jobs, enhancing affordable and clean energy access, while also increasing other health and environmental co-benefits. Briefly, back to SB 62, we appreciate that the informal note also includes both high-level political messages on just transition as well as key elements of the just transition coming out of the dialogues held under the work program. On the one hand, the informal note highlights the goal or the what of the transition, which is to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, and how it is inherently linked with pursuing just transition pathways, but also on the other, it outlines key elements of just transition, so the how of the transition that provides concrete guidance to parties to include just transition into their energy transition policies and measures, and more broadly also, as just mentioned, into their NDCs, NAPs, and LTLEDs. So based on these key elements, another actionable or concrete outcome should be based, for example, on actions related to the fostering of decent work, but also respecting, promoting, and fulfilling international labor rights, human rights, and gender-based whole-of-economy approaches that take into account the informal and care economy, and also measures strengthen and adapting social protection systems, including also for informal workers. And lastly, leveraging social dialogue, of course. And we think these should give more concrete directions to parties and non-party stakeholders on a voluntary, non-prescriptive basis to implement their respective policies. And yeah, just to emphasize once more, we should definitely not create a new structure which duplicates already existing structures and initiatives. We've heard about many. I'll just complement a few. But the EU also considers that analyzing and providing a synthesis of the work undertaken on just transition within and outside the UNFCCC identifying also the potential remaining gaps is really the crucial exercise here, and then assess really honestly the feasibility of our work program to cater to these, to actually provide us with fertile ground, also keeping in mind that institutions outside of the UNFCCC might actually be better equipped to accelerate the implementation on the ground. So UNFCCC obviously has never been designed as such to serve as this implementing body. But nevertheless, of course, there's much potential to interlink the work, and we are of course always eager to understand also better of how the ideas that are being put forth by other parties and non-party stakeholders respond actually to this crucial aspect of how to fill the gaps in the best feasible way through this process that we are in here. Now briefly on the second question, we think there's an opportunity to foster more dynamic exchanges and collaboration also between national experts on just transition, as well as synergies within work streams and initiatives within and beyond the UNFCCC. And of course, as we've seen already, there's a vast body to build on. I'll just mention very briefly those that have not been mentioned in the icebreaker presentation. We've briefly touched upon G20, but actually beyond the energy sector, also in other relevant work streams related to industrialization, but also the energy and climate working group, they also focus on just transition. So bringing these together better, there's definitely potential with other non-G20 relevant initiatives, but also the World Bank Just Transition for All initiative and Just Transition Taxonomy, the NDCP and the UNDP Climate Promise, and the Global Energy Transitions Forum, launched also to accelerate implementation of the COP28 tripling and doubling goals through international coordination, investment mobilization, and project pipelines in emerging and developing economies. The WTO, in particular, the Committee on Trade and Environment, and its trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions, and the Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform Initiative, the MDB's work on just transition, including also their just transition high-level principles, the Clean Energy Ministerial Empowering People initiative on skills and inclusivity for just transition, and also the campaign on sustainable lifestyles, fairness, and access to clean energy technologies, and lastly, the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transition. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Germany. Next on my list I have Canada. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll weave in both of the questions at once here. So I guess maybe on the concrete outcomes of this dialogue and what we can achieve here. I think maybe as a first step, the Secretariat, we would encourage the Secretariat to include in its summary report a list of existing MOI mentioned in the dialogue, including guidelines, principles, and other capacity building and peer learning, knowledge exchange efforts, as well as technical financial support that is available for parties to tap into and make use of. I think we've heard a lot of examples over the last day and a half of of just transition being implemented beyond the UNFCCC, many of which were mentioned yesterday by myself, and my colleague from Germany just mentioned a few other ones. I would also point to other colleagues in the room who have mentioned UNDRIP and the ILO. Within the UNFCCC, others have also mentioned the technology mechanism and the KCI. I would also note the achievement of last year in Baku on the NCQG, which provided a holistic framework to guide climate finance delivery over the next decade, in which we recognized as parties the importance of continued efforts to support just transition across all sectors and thematic areas. Parties agreed to shift the paradigm by moving beyond a single number goal and capturing qualitative issues, including elements of a just transition. At last year's COP as well in Baku, parties also gave guidance to the Global Environment Facility, which instructed the GEF to work with developing countries on ways to incorporate just transition elements into national climate plans and programming. We'd also acknowledge the Green Climate Fund, as part of its strategic plan, is supporting paradigm shifts across sectors with a focus on just transitions in the energy, building, industry, and transport systems, and is meant to incorporate the evolving understanding of just transition that's undergoing consideration within this dialogue and the negotiations. So these and many international initiatives and programs have led to Canada's position to support a mapping exercise to better identify where just transition principles, policies, initiatives, etc. are being implemented to gain a more holistic picture of the landscape that we're currently in and gain a better sense of what the JTWP's value add is and can be as we go into its review at COP31. So another thing that we can accomplish through this dialogue is starting to get to work on finalizing key messages that are emanating from this dialogue and the previous ones to reach an agreement at COP30. These messages can send the proper signals on what a just transition should look like and inform the development and implementation of inclusive, gender-responsive, rights-based national policies and strategies that are tailored to local realities to support the transition to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Next on my list, I have Saudi Arabia. You have the floor.
Thank you, facilitator. First, in response to the shared slide by the Secretariat, as for linkages and guidelines, we reiterate our rejections for all top-down, external imposed energy source targeting and or punitive guidelines. Linkages and target the infringe of the nationally determined nature of just transitions and ignore the core principles of CBDRRC. We support the LMDC proposal for Just Transition Technical Assistance Network, JTTA. Such an arrangement is not optional. It's essential for continued effectiveness of UAE Just Transition Work Program. It's deeply concerning that during the SP62, developed countries consistently resisted even discussing the network. The refusal goes against the spirit of constructive engagement and undermines the very purpose of the UAE Just Transition Work Program, which is to support all parties in designing nationally determined just transition pathways. Saudi Arabia stressed that Just Transition Technical Assistance Network must be established as an institutional arrangement under the UAE Just Transition Work Program. Without such an arrangement, a network designed to support developing countries in achieving their own just transition through capacity building, technology assistance, and cooperation. We are disappointed that strengthening these important work program is being opposed when the need for practical tools and institutional support has been highlighted by many developing countries. For us, the establishment of this network is concrete, actionable outcome that would ensure that Just Transition Work Program delivers beyond words, helping developing countries access the technical assistance, capacity buildings, and cooperation that beyond nationally driven just transitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Next on my list, I have Yungo online. Yungo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'm Carmen, speaking on behalf of Yango, the official youth constituency to the UNFCCC seat. Well, but let us be frank, while this exchange is valuable and necessary, a lot of these views have been shared before in dialogues and contact groups. Meanwhile, back home, the transition is already underway. And while some promising just transition policies exist, justice is still far from being at its heart, leaving many communities to bear the brunt of change. And that is why, alongside our allied constituencies, Yango has been calling for the establishment of a global just transition mechanism since the third dialogue in Panama this year. As also echoed by our colleague from UNCTAD in the scene-setting presentation, there is the need for new cooperation mechanisms. And our proposed mechanism would be such a tool to address the challenges voiced by all of you, including through coordination of existing just transition activities to maximize efficiency, and targeted support for developing countries in developing and implementing their nationally defined just transition pathways. And on the question on synergies, such a mechanism would be linked to relevant UNFCCC bodies and work streams, leveraging synergies within the climate regimes. Additionally, it would include a network of experts. In the interest of time, I will not go further into any details since Ango already did so, and at SB62 we submitted a detailed outline of what this mechanism could do and how it could be structured in a manner that is resourceful and does not duplicate existing efforts within the UNFCCC. Nevertheless, we want to use this moment again to call on all parties to constructively engage in discussions about such a mechanism. And finally, let me emphasize that the activities of such a mechanism must be rooted in the principle of equity as well as the goals of the Paris Agreement of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Thank you.
Thank you, Jungo. Next on my list, I have the LDCs. LDCs, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Just to start off, I think it's important to note that from the beginning of this work program and through the dialogues, the LDC group has indicated the expectation that the JTWP will have an implementation arm or an implementation aspect to it, however we reach that. And we see this happening in multiple ways. So on a technical level, we see the JTWP and any actionable outcomes to come out of it to help with national level long-term energy planning and low-carbon industrialization pathways that integrate sectoral cohesion and also include resilience of energy systems towards climate impacts. On the implementation level, we see the JTWP and its implementation arm supporting NDC implementation. A lot of the targets in the NDCs put forward by LDCs do have renewable energy targets and ambitious targets that are not implemented due to lack of means of implementation, and we see the JTWP enhancing that. We can see the JTWP having a role in the delivery of energy access, which we have highlighted as a really, really key issue for us. And maybe not to repeat points in the room, but to add legal advisory could also be a role that the JTWP can incorporate. We know that the ICJ advisory opinion also includes some information on legal liabilities, including that of multinational corporations and private sector within national boundaries. And LDCs should be given the requisite legal support and capacity building around this so they can avoid any exploitation by multinational corporations. We've also highlighted this in the past, but we see the JTWP because of its integrated and cross-sectoral nature that it should play a role in improving debt sustainability within the LDCs. So developing debt swap options that are specifically related to the growth of clean energy access and economic diversification for LDC countries, so they don't have to rely on high-risk carbon components for economic growth. This can also help combat domestic reluctance when it comes to leaving reserves untapped, and will also have co-benefits for the other sustainable development goals of LDCs. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, LDCs. Next, I have the LGMA online. LGMA, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I won't reiterate too many of my points, as I know they've been raised by my colleagues from the LGMA on the ground, but also ourselves and other breakout groups. But very basic point, of course, is that subnational governments are vital for achieving a just energy transition with the closest level of government to people. And if we are serious about making the energy transition work for people, for it to be fair and for energy to be democratized, subnational and local governments are key. In the previous session, I outlined some of the ways in which subnational governments are key to delivering the just energy transition. So I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but that's everything from expanding clean energy access, supporting energy poor households as part of the transition, and using powers to manage a just transition so that their socioeconomic dimensions can be well addressed and well planned, and also being key on social dialogue. Would like to say thanks also to a number of parties over the last 2 days who have raised the important role of local governments. We saw interventions from Australia, Philippines, and Brazil who provided great examples of working with local and regional governments as key to the just energy transition. With that in mind, and in the interest of time, and I see others on the floor as well, I just wanted to summarize sort of 3 key recommendations and asks that we have on behalf of local governments and municipalities, which is bearing in mind everything that I have just said on the role of subnational governments and the important role they can play as partners for national governments, would be key to see formally, the recognition of the role of subnational governments as implementers and partners in a just transition, including in the just energy transition, as part of any final Just Transition Work Programme COP30 decision, but also just encourage important references to vertical integration as the key to delivering a just transition. We talk a lot in these just transition discussions about an all-of-government approach, and very much that is limited to looking at across government in terms of how we overcome silos, but we don't look at what that means in terms of vertically. So thinking about how you can think of all of government as well as the different levels of government as part of the just transition approach. Secondly, any mechanism, if agreed, has a clear role in engagement of local governments and includes that perspective from the start. I say this with having been also involved previously in discussions in the processes around everything from the Green Climate Fund to the New Loss and Damage Fund, where by not considering subnational governments at the start, you end up retrofitting any kind of mechanism, which then means that the community and the local element can sometimes come too late. And so we'd really encourage that if any mechanism proceeds, there is a recognition from the start of the role of municipalities. And finally, just ensuring that there is a continued sort of feedback loop of the examples of how national and local governments can work together to deliver a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, last speaker on my list, I recognized Egypt. Egypt, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I intend to have a short intervention, not repeating much of the well said by many of the developing countries. I'm intervening on behalf of the G77 and China with that regard, and I would like to reiterate, the many proposals that the G77 and China and its subgroups have conveyed in previous discussions and under the negotiation with regard to the institutional arrangement as being part of the outcome of our Just Transition Work Program. And we, on many occasions, we had identified the high-level objective of this kind of arrangements. And I like, the word that was used by our colleagues from the LDC with regard to the implementation arm. So we can consider, this kind of arrangement as an implementation arm of the Just Transition Work Program. And I believe that we have a lot of commonalities with regard to how rich, how we evaluate the richness of the discussion under the Just Transition Work Program, and we all acknowledge this important discussion and how it has been evolving over the process itself. I would just like to comment on some of our colleagues' intervention with regard to having some alternative options for an outcome for the dialogue, including the mapping exercise that the Secretariat can provide. And I would just like to maybe we can think about, like, would that be really feasible within the budgetary and the capacity limitations that we have within the Just Transition Work Program. And this would bring me to the point that until this time, we still don't have the report of the third dialogue, and we really know this is due to the limitations and the capacity of the Just Transition Work Program Secretariat team, which we totally acknowledge their great efforts in the preparation of the work program, but at the same time we understand all these constraints, and maybe this is something that we should take over to the budgetary rooms as well, and we see what are the allocations for the Just Transition Work Program within the UNFCCC budget, and how we can work on that, because it also extends to the participation of the developing countries and the prerequisite that they should be also enrolled in the mitigation work program. So I assume that their budget is part of the mitigation work program rather than an independent budget. So this is something that we should also think very carefully about, and think, like, would that be feasible or not, and that would actually support the request of the developing countries and the G77 with regard to the necessity of having this implementation arm or the institutional arrangement under the Just Transition Work Program, so that we would be able to have concrete outcomes out of this program. I will stop here, and I hope I didn't take much of the time, but thank you very much for this very helpful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Egypt. On behalf of G77, I see no other requests for the floor, so we will be closing now here, and you will be joined next by topic 2 on the role of trade and international cooperation in supporting just energy transition pathways. The facilitator will join you in this room shortly. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back in plenary.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for your patience. I hope you were not waiting too long. As you can imagine, there was a very vigorous discussion with energetic participation in room 1. I expect nothing less from this room too, but we couldn't get through every intervention there, so I appreciate if you want to intervene to please keep your interventions to key main points in order to allow as many people as possible to participate. Raise your flags, both in the room and online, and we will get to you in order. Oh, and I should also say, this discussion is going to be on the role of trade and international cooperation in supporting just energy transition pathways. We're focusing on 2 broad questions. Number 1, what lessons are being learned in terms of cross-border impacts of climate measures, including trade impacts? And what could be the role of trade in supporting nationally determined just energy transition pathways? The second question is on how can international cooperation and partnerships enhance and expand support for nationally determined just energy transition pathways? Thank you. Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, facilitator. First, we are concerned with the framing of the question that only water down the negative impact of unilateral measures, but presented in a way that is positive as a climate action policy. This is threatening the very trust on which is the process of depends. Unilateral trade measures contradict Article 3.5 of the Convention and undermine the multilateral framework parties have built together. Starting with Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in energy security through unifying its grid to ensure stable, secure, and affordable electricity and available for all. As part of that, we have developed a national framework that ensures that renewable claims are not duplicated to ensure that highest level of integrity. Unfortunately, unilateral trade measures such as carbon border adjustment mechanism and its enforced rules on others is actively working to undermine our energy security by refusing to recognize our national framework that was built according to the national circumstances. CBAM refused to recognize our National Renewable Energy Certificate, REC, despite its high integrity and robust safeguard against double counting. By dictating what is or it is not acceptable, CBAM undermining our sovereign right to design energy systems that meet our own needs and circumstances. Saudi Arabia operates a unified grid to guarantee stability and energy security across the country. CBAM effectively tells us that this sovereign design choice is unacceptable because it doesn't fit their top-down design for how other parties' energy system should look like. In practice, CBAM is pushing us to weaken our grid energy security just to comply with their unilateral trade rules. We are now being asked to force our industry to carry significant losses to CBAM cost just because CBAM refuses to recognize our renewable claims. This is a direct penalty on our industries, a penalty on our workers, and a penalty on our community, and a penalty on our economy imposed unilateral by others. And instead of rewarding integrity, energy security, and innovation, CBAM pension it. And our REC framework detects every claim of the grid to ensure transparency. Yet CBAM ignores this and demands critical that do not fit our national context. This is not about a climate ambition, it's about protectionism. This case shows how unilateral measures are not abstract. They are actively making us less energy secure, less competitive, and less able to pursue national development just transitions. CBAM actively discourages investing in energy and renewable energy in our country because of its short-sighted, punitive, and top-down nature. If Just Transition Work Program is serious about justice, it must explicitly address the harm caused by CBAM and similar unilateral measure, and call for a recognizing of supranational system that ensure integrity without undermining developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. I see no other flags in the room yet. I see Germany has now went up. Germany, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So as we've reiterated in Bonn as well and previously, we're really open to engaging very constructively on the nexus between climate and trade, and so that's the spirit with which we came here. However, of course, we will need to react, and I didn't do so consciously in the previous sessions where this issue was touched upon. So bear with me if I briefly react, and then share also our more positive thoughts on the issue. So we understand that there are concerns about the framing of the session around cross-border impacts of climate measures, including also trade impacts, but we would like to reiterate that we believe this framing allows us to discuss issues related to the relation between trade-related policies, and the just energy transition in a balanced manner. So many climate policies, such as those aimed at addressing carbon leakage in emissions-intensive industrial sectors, cannot be qualified as unilateral measures. So we would not be able to talk about such climate policies under this header proposed by some parties. However, as we are showing today, we are also ready to discuss issues related to climate measures with trade impacts in a balanced, transparent, and also non-adversarial, non-intrusive, non-punitive manner, respectful, of course, of national sovereignty, and also with the understanding that these issues will not crowd out other elements we've agreed to discuss under this work program. So on this point, we would also like to add that the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement were not designed to assess individual parties' nationally determined policies and measures, and have no mandate to do so. And will also continue to discuss the positive and negative impacts domestically and cross-border impacts and opportunities of policies and measures to combat climate change. So with regard to the first question more specifically, and on a positive note, of course, trade policy at the national level, but also regional and international levels can help accelerate the energy transition and contribute to improving access conditions, harmonizing regulations, but also phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and ensuring the distribution of environmental goods and services to boost domestic production capacity, and creating open, clean, and fair markets is, of course, critical also to ensure access to energy goods and raw materials. The growing number of energy efficiency requirements for consumer goods can help to reduce domestic energy consumption and related GHG emissions by excluding the most polluting goods from the market, so promoting and developing coherent regulations in alignment with international standards, including for the measurement of carbon emissions embodied in traded goods or energy efficiency, can also minimize regulatory costs and duplication while helping to achieve climate goals. Carbon pricing, such as taxes on carbon-intensive goods, can also be a very effective tool in reducing emissions. I'll not go further into detail on that. And also we think that transparency and dialogue with stakeholders and partner countries affected by climate measures is, of course, key to developing environmental and climate action policies in a way that achieves also the goals that motivate us all in this regime. So consciously, of course, about potential relevance of the EU's trading partners and the need to comply with WTO rules, the EU has designed all its European Green Deal measures also very carefully. We do a lot of outreach, a lot of consultations. I'll not bother you with the details of all the outreach that we are also constantly increasing. Let me just also hint to the trade and sustainable development chapters in our trade agreements. And these agreements are an important driver, of course, for sustainable growth, both in the EU but also in partner countries. And so modern EU trade agreements contain rules and on trade and sustainable development, containing an ambitious trade and sustainable development chapter. Just hinting to the clean trade and investment partnerships, not going further into details. And if you have further questions on the various instruments, how we try to engage and take seriously, deal with the concerns of partners, happy to provide some more details. Thanks.
Thank you, Germany. I now turn to EOSIS.
Thank you, co-facilitator. With respect to the first question for small island developing states, we are obviously particularly exposed to the cross-border impacts of these unilateral trade-related climate measures. But while our exports are obviously smaller in volume, these measures result in some compliance costs and administrative burdens which fall heavily on our limited institutional capacities. For SIDS, and I'm happy to, I guess, react to what was just said by Germany and the EU in terms of the example given in terms of the opportunity to reach out and have that interaction or discussion when it comes to the responses of the particular measures, which would be the EU CBAM. We realized and noted that SIDS were not explicitly included in the EU's commitment to assess the impacts of CBAM, and there was specific mention to the LDCs. So this raises some concerns for us about being sidelined despite our economic vulnerability and high dependence on imports and niche export items. But at the same time, CBAM and similar measures are prompting wider adoption of carbon pricing and emissions reporting, which could open opportunities for cleaner industries. For SIDS, trade has to be part of the solution, lowering barriers to renewable technologies, facilitating access to low-carbon goods, and embedding equity into global trade and climate governance so that we are not disproportionately burdened. As to the second question, international cooperation and partnerships are essential for making trade measures supportive of nationally determined just transition pathways. This means technical assistance and financial support to navigate the compliance requirements and build domestic capacities and protect our export competitiveness. There was a recent study conducted on the impacts of the UK CBAM on one SID, Trinidad and Tobago, which is a big exporter of a number of the items or goods that are being impacted by both UK and EU CBAM policies. And that study emphasized the continued importance of constructive international cooperation, particularly with the UK government and, well, the EU body, to potentially mitigate adverse economic effects of the CBAM and to provide valuable support for SIDS just and equitable transitions towards a low-carbon economy. So we also note that stronger coordination between the WTO and the UNFCCC process is needed to avoid governance gaps that leave small and vulnerable economies exposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eosis. Now for Grenada, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Grenada would also like to, lend its voice to the intervention just made by EOSIS. The role and implications of geopolitical decisions affecting the access, the availability, and high price of input technologies that can assist in energy efficiency, energy security, and transition to clean energy actions, I think is something that is a major issue. And how can just transition considerations mitigate this volatility, especially as SIDS are on the receiving edge, on the receiving end of such technologies coming from faraway countries, and SIDS are not a creator or an exporter of such technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Grenada. And I believe it's Egypt.
Oh, thank you very much.
facilitator, for allowing me to have the floor. And I believe that we are discussing now trade and the importance of trade in general and in climate action in specific. And we have to look back into history, and we look back while we agreed on our Rio principles and the UNFCCC, how much trade had a role in the globalization of the world and the economic welfare of the global economic welfare. And it had great role in that perspective, and we all, learned. I'm an economist by nature. This is my study, and back at school when we were studying the globalization and the value chain and the role of the complementarity between these the roles of the countries. So trade had an integral part in the globalization. And what I see right now, we are more moving towards fragmentation when it comes to the trade policies. And this is very apparent when it comes to the WTO and the work that's going under the WTO. And it is even extending to the UNFCCC process under the CBAM policies that we are discussing today. So going back to history and how the globalization worked, it was pretty much simple in its terms, and it is basically to make the optimum efficiency of the production system, and the developing countries had an integral role within this production system, and one of its pillars was the cheap energy access that the developing countries were able to provide. And this is how the globalization worked, and beside the cheap labor as well. We shouldn't also take that out of the equation. So this is how the developing countries were able to contribute to the global value chain. And now as we are moving and we're shifting away from the older development parameters that we had agreed on, that we will be moving towards new development models that would take into consideration the climate change and the green industrialization revolution, if we may say. We are undermining big time the global development architecture that we had developed under the globalization itself and the WTO. So it is very related discussion to our climate change as well under the UNFCCC Article 3.5. And basically Article 3.5 was negotiated and was agreed upon under the context of the globalization and the value chain, as I have explained, and the development model that existed there. That's why I was very keen that any trade policy measures for the purposes of climate change should not constitute a means of arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination or disguised restriction on international trade. And this is an international law obligation on all parties of the UNFCCC. And we see it, the CBAM policy is directly violating this international law obligation under this convention, and under its conditions and the global architecture that this was negotiated under, and the global development model that we had, and we had existing at this point, and it should have been existed at this until our time. So it is very critical issue for developing countries, and we need so many avenues to discuss it, especially that when we bring this kind of discussion under the WTO, we are told by the negotiators from developed countries and the countries that are implementing these measures, the CBAMs, that this is a climate issue that should be addressed under the UNFCCC. And when we
go and talk to the same delegations within the UNFCCC, we're told this is a trade issue that should be discussed under the WTO. So we, at the end, we ended up puzzled and where exactly we would be able to discuss this very important issue. And that was basically the main agenda, I wouldn't say like, the main agenda issue at the SB 62, and we had agreed that this would be addressed under the Just Transition Work Program and all relevant agenda items under it. So we see that CBAM is directly relevant to the trade issues, and it is considered as a unilateral trade measure under the Article 3.5 of the Convention, and we hope that the Just Transition Work Program would provide us with the adequate avenue to discuss it thoroughly from all its perspective. And I see also value in the proposals made by our colleagues from IOSIS and LDC with regard to having like a joint WTO and UNFCCC kind of discussion so that we will be able to address this important issue properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Egypt. I now invite Canada to take the floor.
Thank you, facilitator. I'll just start off by noting that Canada does acknowledge that trade and climate policies can be mutually reinforcing, and we recognize that promoting open, fair, and clean markets, clean technology, and resilient supply chains can be important to tackle climate change and drive clean and sustainable growth. And we look forward to some of the discussions that are already occurring under the UNFCCC, including under the KCI and the Response Measures Forum, which will discuss elements of cross-border impacts of climate measures. On international cooperation and partnerships, these are areas that can facilitate the exchange of knowledge, best practices, and lessons learned, foster collaboration and innovative solutions, and connect technical and financial resources, as well as bridge critical gaps between expertise and policy planning. This work program, for example, is offering a unique space for international cooperation through knowledge exchange and facilitating the development of national planning in the context of the Paris Agreement and the energy transition. There are many examples of cooperation on the just energy transition that are far more advanced than this space, and they are going on far beyond these four walls. I mentioned quite a few yesterday, such as the ILO, the IEA, which provided an update on its work on just transition just today, IRENA and the initiative on climate action transparency, as well as the NDC partnership. But I'll note just maybe 4 examples that I think might be important for outlining here. So one is the country platforms, which are offering ways for governments to lead just energy transitions with coordinated support from international partners. This is aligning national priorities and policy development with public and private investment, and they bring together key stakeholders to mobilize finance, share expertise, and ensure an inclusive transition. Just energy transition partnerships, which were mentioned today as well, are a positive example of how the donor community and the private sector can come together to support country-led decarbonization pathways. We're seeing a lot of good progress made across each of the JETPs, and all partners have a better understanding of the complex challenges and opportunities ahead. The Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is co-chaired by Canada, is an example of collaboration to mobilize technical, financial, and policy instruments that can catalyze more action to phase out coal, signaling national policy and commitments to investors and businesses through involvement in initiatives such as the PPCA can help to usher in private financing to support workers and communities for a successful energy transition. Under the PPCA, the Coal Transition Commission brings together emerging and advanced economy governments, public and private finance to develop practical solutions to accelerate just transitions from coal to clean energy globally. The PPCA and the CTC is actively working to create solutions that enable just transitions. So these platforms and others that have been mentioned support and promote peer learning and knowledge sharing, which support ultimately international cooperation and help countries design just transition strategies based on successful models and best practices. Thanks.
Thank you, Canada. We have been told that we have a hard stop at 2:10, which means we have 2 minutes left. I have two final speakers. First, we're going to hear from IPO and then from Tanzania. So I encourage speakers to try and stick to key points, particularly those that have not already been mentioned. Thank you, IPO.
Going to be hard. I don't know. 2 minutes is going to be hard, but I will try. This is just building on the intervention made by one of my colleagues in the other room, but I would like to focus on the risks posed by investor-state dispute settlement systems, which you mentioned in your presentation. Thank you so much. And I would like to quote actually one of the reports of UNCTAD in 2023 that said that 1/3 of the ISDSS cases are now tied to the extractive sector. And that also companies are suing states for phasing out fossil fuels, denying permits, or upholding environmental laws. There are many examples of indigenous communities that are currently fighting to protect their rights against extractive corporations who transfer the responsibility to states when it comes to indigenous people's rights. But corporations not only have the obligation to conduct human rights due diligence, but also to align their operations with international human rights standards protecting the rights of indigenous peoples. So this is especially important for indigenous peoples as we see that how many countries are engaging in making deals between countries to secure their access to minerals deemed critical for the energy transition. So in that regard, we just want to make some recommendations that safeguards must be included in these agreements. They have to be included. Otherwise, the rights of indigenous peoples will not be protected. These include the right to self-determination, the right to free, prior, and informed consent, and also the establishment of traceability systems that ensure that there is disclosure of associated environmental and human rights risks and harms. And that these agreements also should have zero tolerance for violence against indigenous people's rights and environmental defenders. And there should be accountability mechanisms also. No criminalization of indigenous peoples, and we need a reform of the ISDSS system. This is the only way in which we can protect indigenous people's rights. Thank you.
Thank you, IPO. And we close with Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. Let me also add my voice on the role of trade in supporting just transition. I'm trying not to repeat what has been said by the previous speakers, but my delegation sees that trade should be a lever for fairness and equity by ensuring developing countries who are producers gain access to global market for green products and they are not locked out by strict measures. Regional platforms like that in Africa or Asia or any developing country can enhance South-South cooperation and promote intra-regional trade in clean technologies and support shared transition. Trade rules must facilitate value addition or at source, supporting beneficiation of critical minerals and building resilient supply chains that deliver industrialization and job creation in developing countries. On question number 2, the international cooperation and partnership for just transition, looking at the various parameters, for instance, they should scaling up means of implementation, whereby the international partnership must deliver predictable, adaptable, and accessible financing, technology transfer, capacity building to close the just transition gap, finance gap. And also they should respect nationally determined pathway, hereby the cooperation should be country-driven, reflecting at developing countries' priorities, national circumstances relate to sustainable development consistent with the principle of the convention. On technology and knowledge partnership, the partnership needs to enhance affordable technologies, access, local manufacturing, and peer-to-peer learning through South-South cooperation, and also triangulate and work with various regional cooperation. On trade and the market fairness, as I already said, the partnership and the international cooperation need to guard against negative cross-border impacts of unilateral measures while expanding market access for green products and services. I thank you, facilitator.
Thank you, Tanzania. And with that, I invite everyone to return to room 1, to plenary, where hopefully I can do all of your inputs justice. Thank you very much for participating, and see you there.